You're standing in your bathroom right now, staring at a toothbrush that probably cost more than your grandfather spent on dental care in an entire year. The tube in your hand promises stronger enamel, fresher breath, cavity protection, whitening, gum health, and about a dozen other things printed in bright colors across the label. Meanwhile, 30 miles outside Holmes County, Ohio, there's an Amish farmer named Eli. He's 78 years old. He still cracks walnuts with his front teeth. He still chews dried beef without hesitation. And according to his family, he's never sat in a dentist's chair in his entire life. Now, before you roll your eyes and assume this is another exaggerated story, stay with me, because what I found in Amish communities over the last several years forced me to question everything I thought I knew about dental care. The Amish have been using the same homemade toothpaste for nearly 200 years. 4 simple ingredients. Total cost, around $2. No whitening chemicals, no artificial sweeteners, no television commercials, no billion-dollar advertising campaigns, just a small mason jar sitting beside a wash basin. And here's the strange part. Many Amish elders still have most of their natural teeth. Not perfect teeth, not movie star teeth, but strong, functional teeth that still work after 7 or 8 decades of use. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly what goes into that paste, why Amish families never abandoned it, and the forgotten morning ritual that may matter even more than the paste itself. But first, let me take you back to a kitchen outside Berlin, Ohio. I was sitting across from an Amish grandmother named Martha. She was 81 years old. No dentures, no implants, no cosmetic dental work. She smiled when she laughed, and the first thing I noticed was that nearly all of her teeth were still there. I asked her the obvious question. How often do you go to the dentist? She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. Then she looked at me like I'd asked whether she hired someone to tie her shoes. We never had one, she said. Not, I never had one. We, the entire community. The answer wasn't unusual to her. It was unusual to me, because where I grew up, dental appointments were treated like oil changes every 6 months. Regular maintenance, necessary expenses, something everybody accepted without question. Yet here sat a woman in her 80s who had spent virtually nothing on professional dental care. The math didn't make sense, so I started asking more questions. What did they use instead? What were they taught as children? What did their parents do? And what I discovered was surprisingly simple. The Amish approach to dental health isn't built around fixing problems, it's built around preventing them. That sounds obvious. But modern dentistry often focuses on treating damage after it occurs. The Amish focus on creating conditions where the damage never starts. Their traditional paste begins with ordinary baking soda. 1 teaspoon. Nothing exotic. Nothing difficult to find. Baking soda has been used for oral hygiene for generations because it's mildly abrasive, strong enough to remove plaque, gentle enough not to damage enamel. More importantly, it helps neutralize acids. And acid is the real enemy. Most people think sugar destroys teeth. It doesn't. Bacteria consume sugar. Those bacteria produce acid. The acid attacks enamel. The Amish understood the practical side of that long before anyone explained the chemistry. They knew that keeping the mouth less acidic meant fewer problems. The second ingredient is fine salt. Not because it's fashionable, not because somebody wrote a wellness blog about it, because salt works. It helps reduce bacterial growth. It supports gum health, and for generations, Amish families use salt for everything from preserving food to cleaning wounds. Using it on the teeth felt completely natural. Then comes the ingredient that surprises most people. A small pinch of turmeric, just enough to lightly color the mixture. The Amish don't talk about curcumin or scientific studies. They simply know the yellow root has been used in traditional remedies for generations. Some families include it, some don't. But in many communities, it remains part of the recipe handed down from grandparents. The final ingredient is clove oil. Only a few drops. If you've ever had a toothache and heard somebody recommend cloves, there's a reason. For centuries, clove has been associated with oral care. The oil has a strong flavor, but it also provides the paste with the characteristic smell that many Amish families instantly recognize from childhood. 4 ingredients. That's it. No laboratory, no patented formula, no secret manufacturing process, just baking soda, salt, turmeric, and clove oil. And according to the families who still make it today, that's all they've ever needed. But here's where the story gets interesting, because the real secret may not be what's in the jar. It may be what never entered the Amish diet in the first place. Sugar. Massive quantities of refined sugar changed American teeth more than almost anything else in history, and the Amish largely avoided that change for generations. Processed snacks arrived late. Soft drinks arrived late. Candy arrived late. While the rest of America was dramatically increasing sugar consumption throughout the 20th century, Amish families continued eating meals prepared at home from basic ingredients. That doesn't mean they never ate sweets. They absolutely did. But the scale was different, and when you combine lower sugar intake with consistent daily care, something interesting happens. People keep their teeth longer. By the middle of the 20th century, the average average American diet looked nothing like the diet most Amish families were still eating. Breakfast cereals loaded with sugar, soft drinks consumed daily, packaged desserts, candy available almost everywhere. For the first time in human history, people could surround themselves with processed sugar from morning until night. The Amish watched all of this happen. Most of them simply chose not to participate. That decision ended up affecting far more than their waistlines. It affected their teeth. An Amish bishop I spoke with near Millersburg explained it in a way that was almost painfully simple. He said, "If you stop feeding the problem, you need fewer solutions." At first I thought he was talking about money. He wasn't. He was talking about bacteria. Every time sugar enters your mouth, bacteria begin feeding. Those bacteria produce acids. Those acids attack enamel. Repeat that process enough times and eventually the damage becomes visible. The Amish didn't need a scientific paper to understand the outcome. They could see it with their own eyes. Children raised on simpler diets tended to have stronger teeth. Adults who consumed fewer processed foods tended to keep those teeth longer. Generation after generation, the pattern repeated itself. What fascinated me was how often Amish families described dental care as a daily habit rather than a medical issue. Modern Americans often think about teeth when something hurts. The Amish think about teeth before anything hurts. That difference sounds small. It isn't. A cavity starts long before you feel pain. Gum disease starts long before your gums bleed. Tooth loss begins years before a tooth actually falls out. The Amish approach focuses on those early years. Small actions, repeated consistently, every single day. I remember sitting in a farmhouse kitchen while an elderly woman named Sarah showed me a notebook that had belonged to her mother. Inside were household recipes, gardening notes, food preservation instructions, and a few pages devoted entirely to health practices. One entry discussed homemade toothpaste, another described the morning salt rinse. A third simply stated, "Clean teeth do not trouble a man." That sentence was written decades before most Americans owned electric toothbrushes, yet the principle remains exactly the same. Prevent the problem before it starts. The more I research, the more I notice something else. The Amish rarely separate dental health from overall health. To them, everything is connected. What you eat affects your teeth. What you drink affects your teeth. How often you clean your mouth affects your teeth. The modern world tends to compartmentalize everything. One doctor for your teeth, another for your eyes, another for your skin. The Amish tend to view the body as a single system. Whether that philosophy is perfect is open to debate, but there's no question it influences how they approach dental care. And then I found something that completely changed my understanding of the story. In 2017, researchers studying Amish communities expected to find widespread dental problems. After all, many Amish families live far from dental offices, many lack dental insurance, some children grow up with very limited access to professional care. By modern standards, that should have produced terrible outcomes, yet researchers repeatedly encountered older adults with surprisingly strong dental health. Not everyone, not every family, but enough to raise questions. How could people with less access to professional dentistry maintain so many of their natural teeth? The answer wasn't one single factor. It was a combination of habits, traditional diets, lower sugar consumption, homemade oral care, and one particular practice that appeared over and over again whenever people discussed the healthiest elders in the community. The morning rinse. Again and again, families mentioned it. Grandparents taught it to parents. Parents taught it to children. Children eventually taught it to their own families. The practice survived because it was simple. It required almost nothing, and nobody needed permission to do it. Before breakfast, before coffee, before anything entered the mouth, a small amount of warm salt water swished slowly for about a minute. That's all. When I first heard this, it sounded too simple to matter. Then an Amish farmer asked me a question. If your barn filled with animals all night, would you clean it before breakfast or after? The comparison was crude, but the point was obvious. During sleep, saliva production drops dramatically. Bacteria multiply. By morning, your mouth contains enormous numbers of them. The Amish rinse first. They've done it for generations. Only afterward do they brush. Only afterward do they eat. Only afterward do they drink coffee. Whether you agree with every explanation behind the practice isn't really the point. The point is that thousands of people have followed the same routine for decades, and many of them have kept their teeth far longer than anyone expected. Now let me show you exactly how Amish families make the paste. Not the version sold online, not the version modified by wellness influencers, the version that has been passed through kitchens, washrooms, and farmhouses for generations. Take a small bowl, add 1 teaspoon of baking soda, add half a teaspoon of fine salt. Mix them together thoroughly, then add a small pinch of turmeric. Not enough to turn the mixture bright yellow, just enough to lightly tint it. Finally, add 3 to 5 drops of clove oil. Stir until everything is evenly combined. That's the entire recipe. Most Amish families store it in a small mason jar with a lid. A single batch lasts surprisingly long because very little is used at one time. When it's time to brush, they wet the toothbrush, dip it lightly into the mixture, and brush for about 2 minutes. No giant ribbon of paste squeezed across the bristles, no foam filling the mouth, no mint flavor designed to make the user feel like something dramatic is happening, just a simple cleaning process. The first thing many people notice when trying a traditional paste is the absence of foam. Modern toothpaste has trained us to associate foam with cleanliness. The Amish never developed that association. To them, cleaning is what matters, not the appearance of cleaning. One Amish grandfather explained it perfectly. If soap bubbles fixed everything, washing dishes would be the hardest job on earth. Everybody at the table laughed, but his point stayed with me. Much of modern consumer culture focuses on making products feel effective. The Amish focus on whether they actually are effective. That difference shapes nearly every part of their lives. The same principle applies to dental care. The homemade paste is only one part of the routine. The routine itself is the real secret. Every morning, every evening, no excuses, no shortcuts, no skipping days because you're tired. The consistency matters more than the ingredients. Several elders told me the same thing in different words. The paste helps. The habit is what saves the teeth. And that brings us back to the morning rinse. If there is one practice that appears again and again whenever Amish families discuss oral health, it's this one: before breakfast, before coffee, before water, a teaspoon of salt dissolved in warm water, 60 seconds of rinsing, then brushing, then the rest of the day begins. The process costs almost nothing. A container of salt costs less than many people spend on a single bottle of soda. Yet some Amish families have followed the practice continuously for generations. One woman in Lancaster County told me her grandmother performed the rinse every morning for more than 70 years. Not most mornings, every morning. She kept nearly all of her natural teeth into her 80s. Again, nobody claimed the rinse was magic. Nobody claimed it guaranteed perfect dental health. The Amish are practical people. They understand that age affects everyone, but they also understand that small habits repeated thousands of times create enormous differences over a lifetime. Think about the math. 1 minute every morning, 7 minutes every week, about 6 hours per year. Over 70 years, that becomes more than 400 hours invested in protecting your teeth. Suddenly, the habit doesn't seem so small anymore. And here's something else I noticed. The Amish don't talk about dental care with fear. Most Americans know someone who dreads dentist appointments. Many people postpone visits because of cost. Others postpone them because of anxiety. The Amish relationship with oral health feels different. Less reactive, less fearful, more routine. They aren't constantly trying to solve emergencies because they're focused on preventing them. That may be the most important lesson in this entire story. Not the paste, not the salt, not the clove oil, the mindset, the understanding that health is usually built long before problems appear. The average American can spend thousands of dollars over a lifetime on dental products alone, then thousands more on procedures, fillings, crowns, root canals, implants. The Amish approach asks a different question. What if the best money is the money you never have to spend? What if the most effective treatment is preventing the damage in the first place? That question has been quietly sitting in Amish communities for nearly 2 centuries. While the rest of the world searched for increasingly expensive solutions, they continued using a mason jar, a spoon, and 4 inexpensive ingredients. Not because they rejected modernity, not because they were trying to make a statement, because it worked well enough that they never felt a reason to stop. So tonight, when you walk into your bathroom and look at the products lined up on the shelf, remember this: somewhere in Holmes County, an Amish grandmother is preparing for bed exactly the way her mother did and her grandmother did before her. A simple paste, a simple rinse, a simple habit. Nothing flashy, nothing complicated. Yet those small daily actions have survived for 200 years. Not because somebody advertised them, not because a corporation promoted them, because generation after generation found them useful enough to keep. And sometimes the knowledge that lasts the longest is the knowledge that never needed a commercial in the first place. If this story made you think differently about dental care, tell me in the comments. What's the oldest natural tooth you still have? And what's one dental habit your grandparents swore by that people rarely talk about today? Because the most valuable knowledge often isn't the newest. Sometimes it's the knowledge that quietly survived while everyone else was looking somewhere else.